I mean, I think it really comes down to it's a fundamental threat to democracy when companies are spending in this way to prioritize their concerns over the concerns of the people that these representatives are supposed to be representing. If you're a constituent in District 12 and you care about something that's not AI, your voice probably is not as loud as $26 million in campaign spending.
Welcome to Blood in the Machine, a show about tech, labor, and power made for you, everybody that Silicon Valley is happening to. I'm Brian Merchant, the author of the book and newsletter of the same name, and I've been reporting on and writing about the resistance to big tech, to AI, for years now. And yes, this is a podcast, a video podcast even, and I'm doing this show for a few reasons. The first is that when I hear from readers or when I'm out in the field talking to workers and organizers and activists, the number one thing I hear about Blood in the Machine is an ask for an audio version for a podcast. So this is it, and this is for you. Second, for my own reasons, what I really wanted to be out there was a show that would offer a weekly sort of update or digest or digging into of the myriad stories that are unfolding at a given time with regard to resistances and protests and organizing against Silicon Valley and big tech. I wanted a show that put the voice of workers, activists, and journalists behind the mic, the ones who were interrogating, exposing, and resisting big tech themselves. After all, every week now, there are people protesting data centers that AI companies want to build in their backyard. There are people organizing against Silicon Valley or resisting AI's encroachment into schools or their workplaces. Students working to reclaim public life from social media saturation, right? This is the moment of the summer of Lud and of college students booing commencement speakers who are extolling the virtues of AI. This is a show that I hope will document those movements and the people behind them. Because there are, after all, approximately 1 billion podcasts out there who center the voices of tech executives and AI advocates and startup founders, and that highlight stories from this business perspective, right? This show is for everyone else, for the people in those executives' crosshairs. This week, for our first guest, we have Molly White. Molly is a technologist, a journalist, and the author of the Citation Needed newsletter. And we're going to discuss her major new project, Tech Influence Watch, which is an effort to keep tabs on the hundreds of millions of dollars of spending that crypto and AI companies are pouring into our elections. But first, the weekly digest of news from the front lines of the resistance to big tech. The idea here is that each week I'll pull out some stories that either I've been reporting on or have been following or have been making waves that either highlight or pull back the curtain on AI and the industry and the ongoing efforts to confront it. And with that, here we go. So this week, first up, township leaders in Michigan take on a proposed nuclear AI data center. The board of the Ypsilanti Township has vowed to fight to our very last breath, quote, against an AI data center project by the University of Michigan and nuclear scientists at the Los Alamos National Laboratory. So 404 Media reports that, quote, if built, the data center will, among other things, run simulations to help America build nuclear weapons, end quote. Now, the blowback comes not just from the audacity of this proposal, but also in the wake of another groundbreaking ceremony for another major data center that has began construction in Michigan. Now, a photo from this groundbreaking showing Sam Altman, Oracle CEO Clay Magorick, and Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer was projected onto the wall. And so during this groundbreaking, Whitmer was caught on a hot mic telling Oracle CEO, in reference to the backlash against data centers in general, quote, "We're used to people saying fuck no and doing it anyway. The people of Ypsilanti have not taken this kindly."
Having to stare at this picture during this meeting has my blood boiling. The waste of space, the complete lack of regard for humans and animals, and for what? And these diabolical morons up here.
The backlash has become so pronounced that Jill Warren, a wife of a local Methodist pastor, has suggested that residents brush up on OSS's Simple Sabotage Field Manual, saying, quote,
"Simply slow things down bureaucratically. Make sure we block where we can. Use very slow agendas and response times, and do within your power the work that you are entitled by law to do."
This kind of backlash, of course, has become routine in cities and regions across the country and indeed the world. And we should expect to see similarly pointed objections, especially to notably controversial projects like those proposed to carry out simulations in service of building nuclear weapons, should the expansion continue apace. AI's incursion into the arts remains a heated and contentious affair, with executives cutting deals to automate artistic production on one end of the spectrum and artists, creatives, and illustrators fighting back on the other. This week, the beloved indie studio A24 announced it was cutting a $75 million deal with Google. Google would invest $75 million to provide AI tools to A24 in order to, quote, "help artists develop new workflows and techniques." A24 says that, quote, "the new tools won't look anything like the prompted generation type of AI that people feel uncomfortable with." And yet, one early project already underway at A24 involves using AI to generate storyboards. Obviously, fans and artists are up in arms. One look at Twitter and you will find a resounding backlash. Let me just read a couple tweets here. There goes A24. Why do they keep forcing AI on us and then integrating it with arts? And then somebody just called them slop peddlers on Reddit. This is also to be expected in an age where artists and art is under siege by AI from just about every imaginable corner. But there are efforts to push back. A group of children's book illustrators based in the UK have launched the "We Are Better Than This" campaign to, quote, "stop the theft by big tech." We'll run their campaign reel here.
They take our data for free and they sell it on for billions. This has made them the richest companies in history. But it doesn't have to be this way. We can build systems that are fair, democratic, and transparent. We are better than this.
Now, the organizers say that this is just the beginning and that the real goal is to create a, quote, "patchwork of people willing to stand up for creativity and children's futures against big tech." You can check out the website and support their campaign at wearebetterthanthis.co.uk. Finally, also in the world of AI and the arts, a group of bipartisan senators have introduced the so-called Creators Act in Washington. The proposed law, which is the Creative Rights Ensuring Artists' Technique and Originality Are Reserved Act. U.S. senators love a good or even a deeply mediocre acronym, as evidenced by the Creators Act. Here, the bill would give visual artists a new legal framework for suing parties that infringe on their visual style. And it would prevent, in theory, people from ripping off their artworks and using it for profit. The bill is backed by Adobe, and who says, quote, "We want creators to be able to use tools that have AI without fear." That's Adobe's chief legal officer, Louise Pentland, speaking to Axios. And this has a number of experts concerned that style is doing a lot of work here, that it's pretty vague. On the one hand, artists may be excited to have representation in Congress and a effort to push back against the mass automation and theft of their work. On the other, Adobe, being the vocal sponsor here, has made lots of folks uncomfortable, and it's unclear how this sort of visual style will ultimately be litigated and whether it's cracking the door open for exploitation and abuse by a different set of actors. And last up in our roundup, Alex Borres, who became a lightning rod for AI issues and AI spending, has lost his congressional campaign in New York after Leading the Future, a super PAC backed by OpenAI and Andreessen Horowitz, plowed $8 million into opposing him. Now, it's an interesting race because an amount nearly twice that was spent by pro AI guardrail organizations supported by Anthropic and others. They dropped nearly $16 million into backing his campaign. It was one of the most expensive congressional campaigns in history, with a total of $27 million being plowed into it. And there are all kinds of implications for what this means in terms of AI and democracy going forward. We will leave much of that discussion to our guest here. But first, let's hear from Alex Borres himself.
Some of the most powerful people on the planet, a handful of oligarchs hell-bent on preventing any regulation of their industry whatsoever, any check on their power, the very people who are fueling Donald Trump decided they wanted to make an example out of this race.
Now, even though Borres lost, I will say that it was a very interesting race, and he didn't lose by all that much. And I still think that it stands to reason that there is much political gain to be had by calling out big tech. He was, and also ran in some cases, before he made his sort of bolder gestures towards regulating AI. That's really what made the industry sit up and take notice on both sides of the issue. The pro-regulation and the anti-regulation factions of the AI industry, represented by OpenAI and Anthropic. And he was able to generate a whole lot of fundraising by speaking out about the big tech and big tech's oligarchy that is rising up and has a lot of constituents concerned. And he was able to generate a ton of press. He showed up on Ezra Klein's podcast and beyond, newspaper headlines. I think it does show that there is an appetite for those willing to take on the industry. It shows that there is an audience and that constituents did seem to like this message of regulating or reining in big tech. And so it'll be interesting to watch going forward, especially as huge sums of money continue to slosh around and Leading the Future and other PACs begin to aim their cash cannons at different races around the country. And we have the perfect person to discuss this with. We'll wade into the issue even deeper with Molly White. All right, we are here with Molly White, technologist, journalist, tech journalist, and the writer behind Citation Needed, and the new Tech Influence Watch, which is a new initiative / project that is designed to track the spending of both crypto and AI in this upcoming election cycle. Hey, Molly, how are we?
Doing well. How are you?
Oh, we're hanging in there. I love this project, obviously. I love much of what Molly does. If you're not familiar with the Citation Needed newsletter, go bookmark it, subscribe right now. Molly is, I don't use the term genius lightly, so maybe I won't use it now. Well, the jury's still out. She's very smart, very good at what she does. And this is no different. Molly, can you explain a little bit about the basics of the project and why you did this thing here?
Sure. So Tech Influence Watch actually started as a project that I began in 2024, and it was called Follow the Crypto then, because it only tracked spending out of the cryptocurrency industry, which was very significant in 2024. That was when they really ramped up their campaign spending and political influence operations in a very major way. And Tech Influence Watch is essentially the evolution of that project. Once I realized that tracking only the cryptocurrency industry election spending was only catching sort of half the story, because so many of these same tech billionaires are backing both crypto-focused super PACs and candidates who are willing to sign on to the crypto agenda, while simultaneously doing a very similar thing with artificial intelligence-focused super PACs. For example, Andreessen Horowitz, the venture capital firm, was one of the biggest cryptocurrency super PAC backers in 2024. This cycle, they're essentially splitting their political contributions between pro-crypto and pro-AI super PACs. The PACs even are run by the same operatives. I mean, it's really all part of this one major story. And so I significantly expanded the project and also added the artificial intelligence industry as well to see how that industry was essentially following the crypto playbook to spend hundreds of millions of dollars on congressional elections in this 2026 midterm cycle.
Yeah, and before we pick up some of those threads, let's go back for a second to 2024 when you did first start tracking this stuff, because one of the reasons that you started tracking this, as I understand it, is because crypto spending just really started exploding. Can you talk a little bit about sort of what happened in 2024 and especially sort of what the fallout of that spending is, and why, the AI industry is now seeking to follow its playbook?
Yeah, the cryptocurrency industry developed a really unique sort of playbook when it came to 2024, which was in the primary race, they identified a number of politicians, including Katie Porter, but also Jamal Bowman, Cori Bush, who they at least painted as opponents of their goals. Now, a lot of them actually really weren't that outspoken about crypto, hadn't taken a huge stance on it. But for example, Katie Porter was perceived to be a strong ally with Elizabeth Warren, who is a major outspoken critic of the crypto industry. And so the industry really selected a handful of races in the primaries and spent incredible amounts of money to oppose these people. Mostly as a way, I think, to send a message to other candidates who might be thinking of taking a stance that might not align with the crypto industry's goals, whether it was explicitly addressing crypto or if it was just general consumer protection, those types of stances that the crypto industry is often hostile towards. And in doing so, they were able to really threaten a lot of other candidates out of taking stances that might have been, considered oppositional to the crypto industry. And also, they spent very heavily to support a number of candidates who were either advocates for crypto, allies to the crypto industry, or who were challenging people who had been, incumbents who had been thorn in the crypto industry side. So one of the most significant ones there was the race in Ohio, where it was Bernie Moreno, a Republican, running against Sherrod Brown, who had been in Congress and had been strongly outspoken about needing to strongly regulate the crypto industry, which the industry, of course, was not happy with. And so this spending eventually did translate into quite a few pro-crypto Congress people being elected to both the Senate and the House, including Bernie Moreno, who is now on Senate banking and is a strong ally to the crypto industry. But there were people in both the House and the Senate who are now very strong crypto advocates, Democrats and Republicans. And since that election, partly due to the congressional successes and, of course, because President Trump was elected, also with crypto industry backing, we've seen a significant shift in the regulatory and legislative approach to the crypto industry. I mean, a complete 180 by the Securities and Exchange Commission, for example, which was the primary regulator of the crypto sector. We've seen a number of laws introduced to quote unquote regulate the crypto sector, but they're primarily deregulatory laws written in large part by the crypto industry. There have been numerous cases against cryptocurrency companies that were brought by the SEC under the previous administration that have been dropped. And I'm talking like a dozen or more. Practically everyone that was open. And things have really changed for the better for the crypto industry, thanks to their millions of dollars in spending in 2024. And they're really hoping to keep that momentum going, I think, through the midterms as much as possible. They're, I think, extremely afraid of losing the sort of strongly pro-crypto Congress they've managed to install, and so are spending even more heavily going into 2026.
Now AI wants into the game after crypto proved so completely successful. AI industry now is looking to replicate this success. So let's talk a little bit about like how it's specifically doing that. I think the group that's gotten the most attention so far in sort of organizing and leading a lobbying effort has been Leading the Future. And that I see if you go over to Tech Influence Watch, again at influence.citationneeded.news, you'll get this beautiful website here. We can throw it up on the video for those watching along, and you can see the leaderboard here, and here is Leading the Future is number 6 by total receipts, so it's kind of the top AI firm. What's the deal with Leading the Future?
So Leading the Future is very similar to some of the crypto PACs in that it's a network of several PACs. They've followed the Fair Shake model, which is that has the sort of flagship super PAC, and then there's a Democratic arm and a Republican arm. And the network is run by, like I said, some of the same people who run Fair Shake. It's led by a guy named Josh Vlasto, who was and is Fair Shake's spokesperson and has been for basically since its inception. And it's heavily funded by Andreessen Horowitz, which is a major backer of Fair Shake. But there is also significant funding coming out of OpenAI through Greg Brockman, who is the president of OpenAI, and his wife. And although OpenAI has tried to sort of disavow any connection to the PAC and claim that they're not funding this PAC, it is essentially the OpenAI super PAC. And there's a very interesting dynamic that is happening with these AI-focused super PACs that is really not happening with the crypto PACs, which is that there is this company conflict happening that is playing out through these super PACs where, you know, OpenAI has its super PAC, and then Anthropic, which is another major AI company, has their own super PAC network that is spending often in opposition to Leading the Future, which has been very interesting to watch. And, you know, in crypto, there is no real conflict in that way.
Right.
There's been some
all about deregulation, right? Like it's just like get it out of the way.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's been some disagreement over to what extent the crypto PACs should fund Democrats. There are some splinter PACs that are really pro-MAGA and refuse to support Democrats, whereas Fairshake has tried to be at least nominally bipartisan. But that's really the extent of the conflict that we've seen playing out in the crypto sector, much unlike the AI sector, where there is this sort of cutthroat PAC against PAC spending happening in at least one race.
Yeah, the Alex Borres race in New York is kind of the big one where, I mean, it's fascinating. They're pouring millions of dollars in. I mean, he is kind of, so Alex Borres, for those listeners unfamiliar, is he's running for office under maybe the most aggressive sort of, like, let's regulate big tech, regulate AI in particular kind of platform that we've seen yet. I mean, you could make arguments for like Liz Warren as being somebody else who's kind of like, but that's more of like an anti-monopoly, like sort of antitrust platform. Like he's kind of come out and seized the mantle specifically, like we need to put guardrails on AI and he's kind of gotten himself a lot of attention for doing that, interviews with Ezra Klein and things like that. And so I was really interested to see this finding on your site where OpenAI is lobbying against him basically, right? And Anthropic is lobbying in favor of him. Right. So what's your gloss on that?
Well, it's a really interesting race, and I think there's a strong argument to be made that the reason that it has become that race has become so focused on AI and why Boris's campaign is so focused on AI is actually because of these AI companies coming out and spending millions of dollars to oppose him. I think they've actually essentially raised his profile in that race when at the beginning he wasn't particularly well known, especially compared to some of the other candidates in that race. I mean, George Conway, who's well known for being strongly anti-Trump. There's Jack Schlossberg, who's from the Kennedy family and has some name recognition with that. Michael Lasher, of course. And so, this has really put AI and the topic of regulating AI into the forefront of this race. And very unusually, we're actually seeing these super PACs running ads that are talking about AI, which is completely against the strategy that the crypto PACs typically use. And it's against the strategy that we've seen the AI PACs using elsewhere. But I think, it's because there's just so much money coming out of the AI industry into this race, it's a necessary topic. And I mean, the amount of money that has gone into this race is staggering. I mean, it's $26 million at this point, both to oppose and support Alex Borres. I think it's around $16.8 million to support and around 8.1 to oppose. All of the opposition is coming from OpenAI's Leading the Future network, and the support is primarily coming from Anthropic's Public First network, although there's actually been a couple of other super PACs that have emerged and entered the race to support Boris as well.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And so just to go back a couple beats, so you were saying, like usually crypto when they spend all this money on campaigning, they'll like find other issues to highlight. They won't be like, they're going to take away your crypto, because they kind of know that like, it's kind of like, when you're even talking about crypto at all, that those are waters that the companies don't really want to be in because it's not a broadly appealing issue. Or is that basically right? Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, they try to claim, publicly, the industry and these super PACs, that crypto is something that really galvanizes American voters and that Americans love crypto. And they put up these numbers about how many Americans supposedly hold crypto. And, they run these polls that are quite slanted and generally methodologically questionable, trying to show that, Americans are big into crypto. But I think the ads that they run and their strategy really, belies the truth of the matter, which is that Americans are at best very split on crypto and also don't generally care about it enough to make it a major election issue. People have really important priorities around the economy or, immigration or all these different issues that are major election issues. And when someone starts spending, massive amounts of money to campaign for crypto and run it, if they were to run ads saying that we need to be working on crypto policy, people are like, who cares? That is not the most pressing issue for me. Why are you buying this election? When I have many other things that I wish my elected representatives would focus on.
Yeah. And AI is like a little bit different, which makes it a little more surprising that they are, because AI has become a more explicitly galvanizing force, but often
to some extent.
Right. It's not going to rank in, only to the extent that it kind of interacts with like the jobs piece and the economy piece, where people worry about, AI's impacts on the economy. It's still a little bit more nebulous, but you get some of these recent opinion polls back, and it's we're looking at majorities of people often saying they're at least like more concerned than excited. It's not something they're going to go out and vote for the pro AI candidate
right.
on the grounds of, which does raise the question of like, what do you think the impact of all this spending is? Like, it's early days to tell. And as you said, like, they're really not sort of wading into the front lines, but I think, is there enough sort of awareness that this is happening to where people know that it's an issue, that like one of my continual big knocks against the AI industry is that they have these very anti-democratic tendencies, whether by spending and lobbying in the ways that you're documenting here, or by sort of pushing the Trump administration to try to, make it, illegal to pass state level AI laws and all these moratoria and sort of those kind of machinations. Like, what is the impact here? And what are you concerned that the impact could be?
Well, like you said, it's early to tell. And, there have been a couple of primaries where AI companies have been involved that have already resolved. But for the most part, they're spending in races that have not yet happened. And so it's hard to say what will happen there. I think that money does play a big role in elections, but ultimately it is up to the voters. And, at some point you're at diminishing returns where there's really only so much ad space you can buy. And, voters are just going to vote eventually. But, I do think that the New York District 12 election is really the exception rather than the rule when it comes to these races where the AI PACs are wading in. Because in most races, it's like the crypto strategy where AI is not the focus of the spending, or at least it's not acknowledged. The ads that these PACs are running are typically much broader and just, are either attacking a candidate for whatever perceived flaws they might have, or, boosting a candidate for generally appealing election issues that have nothing to do with AI. And, I think that it's a very considered strategy by these super PACs. I mean, you'll notice that the names of the super PACs are things like Leading the Future and Public First and Jobs and Democracy PAC. And it's like, it's like they might as well just name them like Hugging Puppies PACs, right? Like, it has not, it's just like, this is a broad, happy name. And it means that at the end of an ad, if you see a political ad, at the end, there's usually small print that says this ad was paid for by Leading the Future. And people are like, okay, right. Whatever that is, and you have no idea who that is unless you go and look it up, which most people don't do. And so I think there is very little understanding of the extent to which these industries are spending in politics. Politico actually just ran a poll recently asking people who they think the top spenders are in the midterms. And people said, oh, it's oil and gas, which, people are so used to big oil being the big spender, or big pharma, or the NRA, or, the sort of typical big campaign finance participants. And they're not aware yet that big crypto and big AI are actually, leading the pack no pun intended, when it comes to industry spending.
Two more questions here, and then we'll let you go here. One, We didn't talk as much about like what specifically like the AI lobby is hoping to win, and I do know it's still it's a little more nebulous, and to some extent they're just trying to buy favorable legislators or buy the favor of favorable legislators. But what in looking at the data, looking at what they're spending on, like what are their objectives here? What are like the key goals that you see?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, especially with the Boris race, we're seeing one of the big goals is really messaging. In a very similar way as Fairshake did in 2024, I think what the Leading the Future PAC is trying to do in the Boris race is like what the crypto PACs were doing with Katie Porter and those candidates, where they want to make an example of him. They want to show, look at this candidate who was outspoken about regulating the AI sector. We defeated him by spending millions of dollars against him. You don't want to be that candidate in your race, do you? And, they do sort of the opposite thing as well, which is that they will support candidates heavily who will come out in support of their agenda, and they'll, sort of pass that message along to other candidates and say, essentially, here's a couple $1 million if you want to get on board with what we're trying to do. So I think that's a big part of the strategy, the spending. But as far as, what they're actually hoping for once this new Congress is in office, it's not as unified as the crypto end of things, where it was just all deregulation all the time. We have these two sort of warring factions in the AI sector, where there's what is broadly associated with the OpenAI, Andreessen Horowitz end of things, which is very deregulatory. They don't want much standing in the way of what they deem innovation. They want these AI companies to be able to develop their models largely unfettered, without safety testing or potentially liability on these companies if things go wrong. They really don't want state level intervention to either try to enforce existing regulations against these companies or impose new ones, or we've seen this sort of rise in moratoriums on data centers and those types of things. That is certainly something they don't like. And so they're really hoping to see the feds essentially step in a very similar way we're seeing the CFTC do with the prediction markets, and say states can't regulate this one-on-one. There needs to be federal unified regulation. And of course, they want that regulation to be dictated by them and, essentially prevent states from being more aggressive than whatever is hashed out at the federal level. But then there's also this section of the AI lobby that is generally associated with Anthropic, which is pushing for what they call AI safety. And that is the idea that we need guardrails on AI. We don't want AI getting out of control or basically coming out of alignment with humanity. It's a lot of this sort of sci-fi, what happens if we create a super intelligence that takes over the world and kills everybody, or, enslaves us as robot slaves or whatever. So it's a lot of that sort of hype stuff that we've seen the AI industry do for a long time. But, what they are pushing for in a legislative sense is some amount of safety testing requirements. Certainly critics will often point out that those types of requirements would actually benefit Anthropic competitively, because they are a large company that is doing safety testing already. If they are able to write laws that require other companies to do safety testing as they define it, it sort of is a way to squash the competitors, prioritize their business over others. Even all of the super PAC spending is a way, I think, to associate the Anthropic name with safety. And, public first is the name of their super PACs. They want to push this idea that Anthropic developed AI, which is Claude for people who are not familiar with these AI companies, is the safe, sort of public-minded version of AI, whereas OpenAI and ChatGPT are unsafe and, going off the rails and that type of a thing.
100%. Yeah. And I'll just shout a couple pieces that I did recently about Anthropic, about how it has sort of utilized both this reputation as being the safe, ethical AI producer. I called it ethics slop, and to sort of vault its way past OpenAI. And then on the other hand, using doom marketing to kind of create these fears and that then need to be addressed by its
Right.
steady ethical hand on the other. And I think that's you've just articulated exactly how that looks like in practice and in campaign spending. So yeah, really, it's a really fascinating moment here. And just to bring it all home, like why spend your time tracking this stuff? Like what about this worries you at the end? We've already touched on some of the major issues here, but it does seem to be that like this is even wilder than sort of the critics feared 15 years ago or plus, when Citizens United was overturned the right to pour at bottomless stores of cash into campaign spending. It's just with, I think, over like $420 million on just like a congressional races by one industry or by two, depending on AI and crypto. It's just it's a wild moment. So like what ultimately, based on what you've seen and what you're tracking, what is the big concern here?
Well, I mean, I think it really comes down to it's a fundamental threat to democracy when companies are spending in this way to prioritize their concerns over the concerns of the people that these representatives are supposed to be representing. I mean, if you're a constituent in District 12 and you care about something that's not AI, your voice probably is not as loud as $26 million in campaign spending, right? And that's happening across the country in states where a lot of these companies don't really have that much nexus. They have customers there probably, but the billionaires who are spending on these races don't live there. They don't have offices there, and yet local politics are going to be impacted by this race to define federal regulation in a way that these companies want, and at the detriment to other issues that maybe don't have $420 million backing them. I mean, where is the $420 million coming to support education or homelessness or all these other issues that people face? It's really just a way for companies to buy time and attention from legislators that could be going elsewhere. So I think that's really concerning. I think campaign finance reform is incredibly important, broadly speaking, and that the crypto and AI industries are just one of the best examples of why. And so, part of this project is to try to highlight that so that people are aware that billionaires spending billions of dollars on politics is a detrimental turn for our democracy, and that the outcomes that we're seeing are sort of a predictable result. And then, I think that one of the biggest issues for me is that people aren't aware that this is happening. So I referred to that Politico poll about how people don't know that crypto and AI are spending like this in politics. People, voters in these elections where millions of dollars are being spent often are not aware. And I think that people have the right to be informed about the people that they're voting for, who is funding them, whose interests are they potentially prioritizing above everyday people's. And so part of the reason I created this site was so that people can just go and look and see, look at my state, who's spending in this state, who's, which races are they trying to influence, which candidates are accepting support from these industries. And then, they can either vote accordingly or pressure their elected officials accordingly, or, just ask questions around why are you accepting potentially millions of dollars from these industries. Because I think that is really the first step to trying to change this unfortunate turn that we've seen politics taking in America since Citizens United.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It is. It's wild. I mean, and I recommend everybody go spend some time on this site, dig around. We've only really scratched the surface. There's so much more. And in addition to congressional spending, you point out that there's been over $7 billion in like quid pro quo spending that interests have funneled directly to the Trump family and its entities, which is wild. This is a wild west of digital commerce and corruption, and it's I'm glad you're out there keeping tabs on it, Molly. At least we have that. So the website is influence.citationneeded.news. Citation Needed is also Molly's website and newsletter. Anywhere else where people can find you, Molly, or is that pretty good?
Yeah, that's pretty much. You can find me from links in there if you're looking for me elsewhere. So.
Well, thank you for dropping by and discussing this sordid topic here. Hopefully we can open some eyeballs and start turning the train around.
Well, thank you for having me.
Cheers, Molly. All right, thanks so much for listening. This was, as you may or may not be able to tell, something of an experiment. This is our first episode, our first run of the show that we're soft launching here. So there may or may not be some warts and less than smooth going. That said, we're excited to get this thing off the ground here. I would like to thank Molly for joining us today, and my producer, Ryan Hodis, who's behind the big board here. Say hello, Ryan.
Hi, everybody. Happy to be here.
There he is. And we're going to ramp the show up to a weekly occurrence. So please do subscribe. Stay tuned. For now, you can get the show by subscribing to the newsletter at bloodinthemachine.com. That's www.bloodinthemachine.com. You can find me on social media at BC Merchant on Twitter and Blue Sky. Keep your eyes peeled because there will be more very soon. We have lots of ground to cover and lots of guests that I'm quite excited to host on the show here. So, thanks everyone, and keep those hammers up.